And so, 23rd day of May, 2015. As the bumper tells you, this is the Ochelli Effect. I'm your host, Chuck Ochelli. So, been an interesting week, I would say, on the show and elsewhere. One struggle after another. Okay. Anyway, want to thank you for tuning in to UCY.tv. And, of course, if you're checking us out on your applicable application of choice and your fondle slab of choice, I do appreciate that as well as all the listeners who decide to tune in further on down the line on YouTube or to pick up the MP3 or whatever it is you choose to do. You can find links to all of that at ucy.tv/TOE. Excuse me. Good Lord. Didn't have a chance to settle in and do anything. Had to actually reboot the computer right before showtime. Couldn't figure out if I had phone lines. Couldn't figure out what I had going on. But, hey, we're still doing this, and it is live and all that. Let's see if things will allow, if things will work properly. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so, Larry, is that you?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Okay, didn't even begin to get into the explanation. Had a a combination of technical issues right before going to air and as I was going to air. So, big fun juggling right before. But gonna explain the general premise of the program tonight, and then I'm gonna start having the conversation with you, sir. So, here's the thing, an article was passed to me, actually a set of articles were passed to me about this situation involving a married couple named the Grabers. It was Howard and his wife Nova Lee, and all about how they had been SWAT teamed out of their home and all of this kind of stuff. I mean, to get into the story in depth, this is why I have Larry on, and I'm going to explain to everybody who Larry is. Of course, Howard is sitting there with you too, right, Larry?
Yes, yes. Yep.
Okay, and unfortunately we have to do this by phone because, you know, as things go, Skype gave Howard a problem reloading it into his device and all that. So with internet issues and all that intact, we're gonna do this via phone, and we'll see how it progresses. But here's the thing, like I said, these Grabers, you know, and I don't want to tell their story. I'm going to let Larry do it. And first, I guess we got to explain exactly who you are, Larry. So why is it that you're speaking on Howard's behalf tonight? Maybe we could start explaining there.
Well, Howard, because of his stroke, he has, I think I call aphasia. He has a little trouble actually accessing words that were lost in that portion of his brain that was damaged. So he kind of gets tongue-tied to a real bad extent. And so it's nice to have somebody that understands the situation, but is, I guess, able to explain it a little more easily. I'm also a certified advocate for the Americans with Disabilities Act, which means I have the authority in courtroom to speak on his behalf. So it's just not uncommon for me to do the talking for him. If you want, I can explain a little bit about what the advocates do. Basically, the Americans with Disabilities Act was put into effect back in 1990 by Herbert Walker Bush Sr., and then his son put into effect in 2008 an amendment to that, which gives it some teeth. And the Department of Justice is actually tasked with the job of enforcing this law. And what we specialize in is being able to explain to the judges and the people working in the court system that people with disabilities need certain reasonable accommodations in order to have access to the court. So we just kind of help them out. And that's kind of what I do.
Right. So the reason why you're speaking on his behalf is, again, because he is disabled. Actually, a guy who, when I speak to him off the air, when he's not too stressed out, he's still got his mind about him. It's not as though he's lost his mind or anything like that. This is literally a physical disability, which winds up limiting his ability to communicate sort of on the fly, I guess. So the fact that you're sort of helping him out is actually not too uncommon. There are people that assist all sorts of disabled individuals, whether they be paraplegic or whatever. And fact is, Howard is in a wheelchair sometimes due to his condition, but it kind of ebbs and flows as these things do when they're neurological conditions. And but you're fully aware of what it is you're talking about, and like I said, Howard will be right there with you so that he could correct anything in case you do make a misstatement or something. And let's first talk about how it is you met Howard, and and how you became involved in his life, and then we'll back it up and explain how this story really begins, which is previous to his disability, is previous to all the troubles with the mortgage company, with the house and everything else. So we'll do both of those things. So first, let's figure out how it is you met Howard, and then, like I said, start off with his story from when there wasn't seemingly so much trouble. How about that?
Oh, very good. I met Howard when he was the president of the local chapter of an organization called Patriot Network, and it can be found at .info. This organization is, in my simple terms, a support group for victims of Internal Revenue Service abuse. And the approach we take is we study the Internal Revenue Code and become more knowledgeable than the agents that bring actions against us. In fact, it's not common for us to actually go to court. We haven't lost yet. So Howard is the type of person that looks into the law and stands by the law and becomes so knowledgeable that he knows how to get his rights. To kind of back up a little bit, for those people who have a medical background, when you talk about Howard having had a stroke, it was a level 8 basal ganglia intracranial hemorrhage, which is more than I understand, but for those with a medical background, it does mean something. So when they were posed with the question of what may happen with the house, they started doing research. And they gave me a copy of the FBI report on mortgage fraud, at which point I became somewhat interested in their case because it was real obvious that there was a problem. So with that information, and then later we've learned about all of the robo-signing and the MERS and all of these things that add to the whole, this huge, if you want to use the word conspiracy, some people call it a business cycle, which is that the banks get people really in debt and then they pull back the liquidity of the economy, crash the economy, and then foreclose on property. It's called business cycle. Anyway, that's kind of how I became interested in it.
Well, right. Hey,
So,
listen, Larry, is there a way you could try to call me on another phone? Because actually, I'm having trouble. You're kind of like distorting a little bit, like the signal is getting stretched here and there on that particular phone. Do you have access to another phone you could try and call in on?
hey, is this any better? Howard just made a change on the phone.
No, it's a
Is it any better now?
No, it's a
Is
reception
it?
issue where the signal is getting stretched oddly, and I don't want people to miss what you're saying. I know it's hard to hear, so I wanted to see if you had access to another device that you could call in on, because it's very important what you're talking about here. And of course, we're only on the background of how you got interested in the case and all that. And I want to, I don't want any of it missed, but I certainly don't want anything misunderstood simply because we have a signal issue. So.
Howard's in the process right now of calling in on my phone, but I don't know how many minutes I have left. So we're trying another phone.
Well, whatever it is we can do, because like I said, it's very important. I don't want it missed or misunderstood. So, this is an extremely important issue, and of course, that's the other line. I'm calling into it. Maybe it's the speakerphone. I don't know. You could try changing that as well.
Okay. I'm on a different phone now. Can you hear me any better?
Oh, yeah, that's much better, actually.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be switching probably another phone in a few minutes. This is quite a challenge here. Okay, what was the question was where I got to know Howard, and I guess that pretty much answers it. Should I start into kind of a timeline narrative?
Yeah, let's begin with the timeline here because, it starts with, a very typical sort of a couple there living in their home. And the guy is actually a really intelligent guy. He's making money. He's doing his thing. He's doing the right thing, basically as far as everybody's concerned across the country. He's taking care of his home. He's got a good job. I mean, this is sort of a very typical story to begin with, and then it turns on him, and I want to begin with, how the story begins, which for me is, here we are, typical existence. This guy is a network engineer. He's a computer programmer. His wife is a homemaker. I mean, very typical sort of existence, right? I mean, let's begin there and then go into exactly where everything starts to go way wrong and the actual theft begins.
Yeah, Howard was making really good money, and just in round figures, what he made per year was not too much less than the value of the house, total value of the house. So he wasn't living really extravagant. He was living modestly, making really good money, and probably worked too hard, got overstressed, and that's why he had the stroke. They tried to get the, I'm trying to think what they call it, FHA, to work with it because they're mandated to, and the HARP and all of those. They tried to get those systems to work, but they were, to the best of my knowledge, it sounds like they were dual track. They were under the impression that the bank was going to be working to do a loan modification, but at the same time they were actually setting up to do foreclosure. One of the interesting factors in this is that the particular bank in question, M&T Bank, I think it's Manufacturers and Trust out of Buffalo, New York, they actually had gotten in some kind of trouble here in Georgia, and they actually lost their license to operate in Georgia before the foreclosure happened. We suspect that may have been one of the reasons why due process was not followed, because had the Gravers actually had access to the court, they could have brought it into, what they call discovery, I guess, or whatever. They could have explained that this company that's trying to foreclose on them wasn't even authorized to operate in the state of Georgia. There's a lot of other factors, things like the robo-signing. And if people are not familiar with MERS, that's where you fill out a bunch of papers to get a loan, and then the papers you would think would go into some file somewhere, but they're not. They put the information on a computer, destroy the paperwork, and then if they go into foreclosure, they use robo-signing, which is, think of like high school kids getting paid like $8 an hour to write their his name like Linda Green thousands of times on documents so that the attorneys have something to carry into court, even though they're not valid documents. At least it's something that gives the semblance of due process.
Well, right, but here's the thing. They started with the refinancing, just like a lot of people wind up having to do because their financial circumstances changed, and Howard's changed, because he became disabled, he was no longer able to maintain that lifestyle you were talking about, which is typical. It's something that does happen. Of course, he's still a young man. It's not as though we're talking about a very old guy who, is somewhere near the end of his life, and we're talking about a senior citizen. This actually happened fairly recently, and he's only in his 40s, right?
That's correct.
So that's one thing. And then, of course, he started out with, like I said, in a situation where he could easily pay his mortgage and everything. So he goes through this process of trying to refinance. And what actually started to happen then? I mean, of course, we hear about M&T Bank being disqualified from being able to operate in the state of Georgia and all that. But I mean, how does this relate directly to Howard? Because he's sitting there trying to make a deal with the financial institution, right? And, which is fully something that you do. I mean, you refinance when your financial situation changes. I mean, it's a normal sort of thing. But what happened here? Because at one point, we're talking about this, and he thinks he's going along with it and doing the right thing. What actually happened in between then and then we have, at some point in this story, a SWAT team coming down on them?
What happened is because the Gravers are used to doing research, they found specific laws that are on the books to protect the homeowners. But in Georgia, what is quite common is at a closing, when a person is signing a bunch of papers, they sign one paper that's called the borrower's waiver of rights, and it negates the laws that are on the books. But if a person has not been given full disclosure that they're signing this waiver, then the waiver really doesn't have any legal bearing. Back up one thing. I am not an attorney. I only know a little bit here and there from what I've picked up. I'm not practicing law. I'm just talking about it. But what happened is, in the state of Georgia, people think that they're getting into a contract, which would be two signatures. I do not know this for sure, but the way I suspect what they're doing is you sign a paper that has three signatures, which makes it a trust, and they call it a deed of trust. And this is one of the things that is used to keep the homeowner from gaining access to the court, because in simple terms, any attorney who has a signature on a piece of paper can foreclose on the property. I don't know that for a fact. It's just that's the way it appears, because I'm not really that. I'm not educated on this. It's only what I can see by looking at the pattern. Now, there is, I don't feel like getting into all the numbers, because if you have people in other states, then the numbers here in the official code of Georgia annotated will mean nothing to them. So I'm going to refrain from getting into a whole bunch of numbers. But basically, there are laws on the books to protect homeowners, and if they do not know those laws, and they've got this waiver, then the court systems think that they don't need to follow the laws. There is a way for a homeowner to protect themselves. They can go to the courthouse and file a rescind of their signature of that borrower's waiver of rights. Because there is, to my knowledge, no provision in the law that requires a victim to continue to be a victim once they realize that they've been victimized. That's largely what the Graver case is. They studied the books. They knew they had laws to protect them. They used the laws, and one of the laws is if they have a claim to a property and the bank has a claim to a property, it is clearly stated that filing these papers to the sheriff, the sheriff is not supposed to take the people out of their house. They're supposed to take these claims to the Superior Court for a jury trial. And rather than do that, the sheriff violated his oath of office, in my opinion, and sent the SWAT team.
Well, here's the thing, right? They're in the process of doing this, and they're following the rules as they've been laid out in their state. And there are similar laws on the books in just about every state, from what I understand. I mean, I know I'm making a very general statement. You'll have to check with your particular local state laws to make sure that they are basically the same, but a lot of them are very similar. I've heard this story a lot. But here's what happens. They're in the process of doing this, which means that they're awaiting, a court to handle it. They're waiting a court decision, right? Speaking in general terms here. I mean, you tell me where I'm misspeaking. And they literally even had the documents from one report I read taped to the front door of their home. Is that right, Larry? Like at the time that the sheriff's deputies came?
That is correct. On numerous occasions, I would stop in to visit them, and I'd ring the doorbell, knock on the door, and I'm standing reading this thing. It was the statutes in Georgia and an explanation to the sheriff how he's supposed to follow these laws. During I call it a home invasion, they call it foreclosure, they literally took the law in their own hands and removed the law from the house and then broke that glass and went in through the flashbangs and they turned the electricity off. It was in August in Georgia, so it was kind of hot. They were upstairs. They actually had to turn the electricity back on in order to use one of those wheelchair, the seat that goes along the steps,
right,
to get him down. So they had to re-energize the house in order to get him out of the house. But one thing I want to do is, for those members who are in the state of Georgia that are listening, I'm going to give you a chance, a heads up, find some paper and pencil or something. Toward the end of this, I'll give you some statutes to read. I just give you the numbers. It's easy to go online, punch in these numbers, and you can read the flow of the law. The Gravers and I have memorized these laws, and we've rattled them off all the time. But as I said, if you're not from Georgia, it may not be as applicable without having to do some cross-referencing.
No, you'll have to definitely check with your locality, with your state laws. I mean, that's goes without saying here. But I mean, when it comes to their story, they had the legal process, it was in process, right? It was actually going, it was supposed to go through the courts. It had not been resolved in the courts as far as the Gravers knew, and the local sheriff should have known that. So at about 9 a.m., and this was in August, right? About 9 a.m. in August in Georgia, they come to the door to evict them, essentially, from the property, right? To foreclose on them, they say. But really what they're doing is evicting them from their home, and they come by force. At 9 a.m. they show up, right? I mean, stop me where I'm wrong here. And then sometime, I believe it was around 2 p.m., is when they actually wind up ripping the paperwork off of the front door and breaking into the home and going in there by force. What time did they turn off the electricity? Do you know?
I'm not that familiar. I was not there at the scene. I didn't hear about it until a few days later. And I don't know. I could probably ask Howard. He may remember. All I know is that I guess it was getting pretty hot up there upstairs. One of the things that they did I thought was kind of interesting. I actually heard the attorney for the bank state that when he was there during this home invasion, as I call it, when they took there's actually a name for this, a counter affidavit of writ of possession, off from the front of the glass, they carried it to this attorney and had him read it, and the attorney said, well, this doesn't apply. It doesn't mean anything. So the police used the attorney from the bank to determine whether there was any legality to this statute that was trying to be invoked by the Gravers. They had every right to do it. It's just the sheriff disregarded it.
Right. So they check with the attorney, and then they decide to storm into the house. And
Mhm.
from what Howard's explained to you, I mean, what happened then? He's in there with no power on. He's still confined to a wheelchair at that point in time, right? But these guys kind of storm in with weapons drawn, don't they?
Yes, I do. I looked through the little report things that each and every officer filled out afterwards, sort of like a incident report thing that each officer did, and we counted up 8 fully automatic assault rifles, which the general public cannot get without a $200 special tax stamp, and that was only part of it. That's what a lot of the SWAT team was carrying. What was really scary is, I believe it was 3 of the .308 caliber sniper rifles that were positioned around the neighborhood. They had told the neighbors that Howard had murdered his wife, and that's why they were having a standoff. And months later, when Noble Lee and I were looking at the house, one of the neighbors walked out and says, "You're alive! We were told that you were dead." So they had already done this cover story thing that Howard had murdered his wife, and that's why they had to stand off. They weren't even honest to the neighbors.
Mm. So when they went in, though, they went in also with the flashbangs too. I mean, what else did they use? And let's put this in context here. I mean, who's inside the house? It's just, like I said,
Yeah.
Howard, who's in a wheelchair, and his wife. I mean, was anybody else in there, or was it just them? I mean, were they armed? Anything like that?
No, they're the type of people who don't like firearms. If I were to have shown up with a firearm, because I have a concealed weapon permit, they probably wouldn't have let me bring it into the house. They were just that type of people. When you ask about what other persons may have been there, there was this other person that was on the paperwork, Z. Watson, which we never did determine who that was supposed to be. It's just, I think what they did is they pulled a name out of a hat and said that person was in the house, but we have never heard who that person would be. It's just something that shows up on the police records.
Right. So just to make sure I understand this, I mean, we're talking about 2 unarmed individuals, one of them in a wheelchair. There's no firearms present in the house. There shouldn't be any sort of armed resistance or anything like that as far as the police know. And here they come charging in with the flashbang grenades, assault rifles, and sniper rifles, to take down this couple who are just so entirely dangerous. And I say that, completely sarcastically. This is the type of overwhelming force you need to remove somebody from their home, despite the fact that they were in the process of doing something, in the courts and all that. Now, I'll shut up now, but I just wanted to make that point. Go ahead.
You make it easier on me when you're doing the talking. There was let's say, a consideration or a rumor that when the sheriff in question here had been given one of these counter-affidavit writ of possession by a homeowner, he got really upset and may have decided to make an example of the next people to file this particular document. There's something of I don't want to call it an allegation or a rumor that the sheriff may have been trying to set an example of by using the gravers, because he had gotten upset because of somebody else who had used the counter affidavit of writ of possession.
Mm.
So that may have been what happened, but
it sounds to me like, nevertheless, it's somebody attempting to assert their legal right to recourse in the court system, and then being trampled upon by the by the sheriff's department there, without regard and with a completely inappropriate response to the individuals that they should have known were in the house. I mean, it was probably not a greatly hidden fact that Howard was wheelchair bound at the time, and again, he didn't have an army in there. There's one other alleged individual. But even on their own reports, they're not saying that they were anticipating any sort of armed resistance or serious problems. But they go in there with a SWAT team nevertheless. I mean, am I crazy here, or is that what happened?
No, I don't think you were crazy. I think somebody else was crazy by doing this. I was flabbergasted when I heard what they did, and I did the research as to what force that they had brought in. There are certain legal terms like under color of law and with the force of arms. They actually, that's what they did. They violated the rights of a disabled person under the color of law, which means not really the letter of the law, just kind of fudging it, and definitely with arms. Totally unacceptable.
Well, and let's move the story forward here. So they go in to take him out. They use this overwhelming force, which is, obvious and apparent to anybody who would have been observing this, right? They drag the two of them out of there. Of course, I find it really interesting that they had to restore power to the house to be able to let him use his, wheelchair lift to get, from the downstairs out, out to the bottom floor and out, right? I mean, this paints a really interesting picture, and they haul the two of them off to jail. In the meantime, they, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the meantime, what they do is they proceed to empty the house of their possessions, too, and they just sort of empty them out onto the front lawn, right?
Yes. Picture you're minding your own business, you think you're going to have access to the court, and they show up, they drag you to jail, throw all of your property out on the lawn, and don't post anybody to protect your property. So you can imagine how vulnerable a person would feel. All their property is there for the pickings for somebody to walk off with. Fortunately, they had some friends that gathered stuff up and got it into a secure location, some of which was the $5 laptop that she had a lot of the evidence on the laptop and a bunch of documents. Like that little green card from the post office saying that they did send this to the sheriff, the claim called the counter affidavit of writ of possession, which I have a copy of it right here. And to my knowledge, this would be having been served properly to the sheriff. The sheriff violated his oath of office. That is merely my opinion, and it should be to a court system, or possibly the Department of Justice or somebody like that, to see if their opinion is the same as mine. But the law says what he's supposed to do, and he did just the opposite. Well, I got a personal problem with that. The Gravers, their rights were violated. And another thing that happened during this is nobody was using a video camera when talking with them through the hole in the glass, and they claimed that they had a federal FIFA, which is a document that would be required, at least on the state level. They said they had a federal one, but would not present it, and it's never been presented. I'd say that they were saying that they had something that they did not have, and if they're saying it was federal, then they were impersonating federal officers, which I think might be a crime in itself, but we don't know for sure. But that is on the video that she was running a video, and when they finally came in, they came into their bedroom, and she was holding a camera, this video camera, and it shows the riot shield coming at her. They knocked her down, kind of messed up, almost dislocated her shoulder, and it was in a really bad bind. She was trying to move to get the pressure off that, and they kept saying, "Stop resisting, stop moving." And then they tasered her. So they hit her with a riot shield, jumped on top of her, and then tasered her. And mainly what she's trying to do is get out of the pain of being all twisted up and her arm all almost dislocated. So that was something that she was not too happy about. I still don't know who pulled the electrodes for the taser out of her, but she sure had some big bruises. That's supposed to have been, Howard just said it took like 6 months for the bruises to go away. That's normally done by the paramedics, but they were out by the time she got to the paramedics. I've got a picture from the Gwinnett Daily Post showing Nova Lee in the ambulance, and the sheriff looking at her. She's laying in the ambulance with her those zip tie type handcuffs on.
So they knocked her down, they tasered her, and then they zip tie. They used those plastic handcuffs, those zip ties on her. So they pretty much restrained her, hog-tied her. How did they handle Howard?
I think they had a wheelchair down the ground, so they got him down there, got him in a wheelchair, got him into, I don't know, a paddy wagon or something, hauled him off to jail. Another, I guess, just insult to injury. Nova Lee is Native American, and when the cop told her to sit on the ground Indian style, they'd stolen her property, which Native American people have a real issue with, and I think they have a real legitimate reason, and then insult to injury, sit on the ground Indian style. She didn't appreciate that. But then they thought she was Mexican.
Oh, yeah, well, like that would have, like that should have mattered anyway,
Yeah, really, yeah.
Gee, I guess it would have been, again, I'm going to be a little bit of a smart ass here, but I mean, what, it would have been acceptable if she was? I mean, what is that supposed to mean anyway? Why are they speculating on her ethnicity or any of this stuff? But meanwhile, you got to knock a housewife down with with a riot shield and taser her because she's so dangerous. She was, again, there's no arms in the house. There's no real physical resistance here. It wasn't like it was a large group that they needed to, shut down real fast. What is what justification did they even provide for doing all this stuff? I mean, just because they had to remove them from the home?
I don't think they had any justification for anything they did. Howard just had me distracted for a second here. I honestly think what they were doing is they knew that they could not get a foreclosure if the Gravers actually were able to bring evidence into court. Another aspect of this, if you look at the court dates, there were 3 court dates before the home invasion, as I call it. The first court date, no one showed up from the bank. The second, some attorney showed up totally unprepared, and the judge told him, come back again and be prepared. Between that second and third court date, the judge signed a order giving the house to the bank. So I was in the courtroom on that third court date, and they said, well, the attorneys haven't showed up. We're waiting for them. They had no intention of showing up. And when Nova Lee tried to get the judge to accept dismiss this case or quash the accusation, whichever, for lack of due process because these guys had never showed up, the judge says, oh, we can't do anything with this case because we've lost your file someplace here in the courtroom. That's what the judge actually said.
He lost the file. Ugh.
He said he lost the file. In all reality, he knew that he'd already made a judgment against the Gravers and gave the house to the bank, but forgot that they had a third court date already scheduled. So they gave the house.
I'm not a lawyer, but to me that sounds directly like they were denied the due process. That they were actually they were in process of going through to get their day in court, and in the meantime, this guy's signing an order, and then when they come back to court again, he doesn't even acknowledge that. He just says, "Well, there's nothing we can do with the case," even though he's already essentially disposed of this. I mean, is that right, or did I misunderstand you?
No, that's exactly correct. And I've got the dates. I can dig through these papers and come up with the actual dates. And it's pretty obvious. It's in the court record. It's a matter of record what they did. So that's the denying access to the court and denying due process. Now, there was one I can't remember which of the court appearances was the first time that Howard had been removed from the courthouse by EMTs because he went into a seizure. But I think to date it's 6 or 7 times they've had to haul him off the premises, either out of the courtroom or off the property, because he goes into a seizure because of the stress. We have a term for that. We call that legal abuse syndrome. And that is the name of one of the books authored by Dr. Karen Huffer, who we took her class on how to become actually advocates for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that's getting into the second half of this discussion, is the Americans with Disabilities Act violations against Mr. Graber.
Well, right. So let's put this all in context. The first thing is they're attempting to go through the process, which is described in the laws. This is the legal process by which they can deal with it. They were attempting to make payments to the bank prior to this and everything else, and the bank refused it too, right?
Yes, the bank would not take phone calls. They wouldn't accept any communications. And because it was FHA, I believe FHA is mandated to work with disabled people to try to keep them in the house. So even the government, that agency had fallen. They didn't do their job.
Right. So that, plus they keep it's where he's being hauled off. I mean, am I right in hearing you say 6 or 7 times he was actually removed for medical reasons?
Yes.
Okay.
One time, his primary physician had just testified that bringing him back in would increase his chance of having another cardiovascular accident, using his terms. Increase the probability from like 20% to 70% of having, and he actually did have another stroke finally. So the doctor had just testified to that. They taken kind of a recess. Howard walked into the hallway outside of the courtroom and went into another of his seizures. And they pulled a blood pressure reading of 260 over 180. And even his doctor said, that's high, even for Howard. I can remember the doctor saying that because they'd gotten him to the scene. He's laying there. Due to a series of, let's say, unfortunate things that happened, some by design, I believe, Howard had gone to a Zig Ziglar pep rally thing called Get Motivated, and was asked to go up onto the stage and participate in a dance. And then they gave him a sympathy vote because they could see he was all screwed up. In fact, he almost walked off the stage. And because of that, they opened up investigations. Oh, he must be guilty of these fraud and everything because, heck, he won a dance contest. He got a sympathy vote. And then there was another case, they did a psychological evaluation where the bright lights were affecting his eyes to where he had to wear sunglasses. They said he was faking the whole thing because they couldn't read his eyes because he was wearing sunglasses.
Well, personally, for me, I've got to wear sunglasses under certain lighting conditions because it's literally painful for my eyes because of the condition I have. And, of course, there's been various damage done to him on a neurological level, which, the eyes, relating to neurology, gee, isn't that a big shock? This is the thing. This is the reason for his disability is the fact that he had these strokes and these neurological issues. And, well, gee, again, with the whole Americans with Disabilities Act, I mean, isn't that a problem relating to him not being able to assist in his own legal proceedings based on the fact that it's stressing him out and that he's got a physician stating that it's too much for him to deal with and could imperil his health and all of that? I mean, doesn't that mean that some sort of accommodation should have been made for that as well?
Actually, his doctor had, it was Dr. Karen Huffer, had sent a packet for reasonable accommodations. She is an expert in this field, and they just disregarded it. And one of them was, don't take him back into court. You don't stress him out until his doctor releases him. And they disregarded that totally. And because of that, he was still having these seizures. Now, with what I understand of the Americans with Disabilities Act, once the judge made a determination like that, he lost his 11th Amendment immunity, and the judge himself can be held personally liable for the medical expenses incurred by his decision. These are the kinds of things that the Americans with Disabilities Act does have some teeth.
Yeah, well, by extension, that's a complete violation of Howard's civil rights, right? Because under the Americans with Disabilities Act, because of the fact that, you know, you have to be granted reasonable access, and also in conjunction with the idea that you're supposed to be able to participate in legal processes that involve yourself, right? I mean, it just seems to me to be a no-brainer here that they would have to make certain accommodations for him, and they just completely disregarded that issue entirely.
Yes.
Ugh.
Yeah, that's why we actually hope that the Department of Justice is going to be moving on this. We're very confident that they will. We spent first part of last week at a symposium with the Americans with Disabilities, and the one person who is charged with the job of enforcing this act, Sally Conway, she's the deputy director of that particular department within the DOJ. We explained it very well to her, and she was very anxious to get the complaint from Novalee so that she can start moving on investigating what the Gwinnett County has done to Howard in respect to his, the violations of his rights. So we're thinking that there may be a light at the end of the tunnel, not just another oncoming train.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go back to the story here, because of course, you know, Howard's rights being violated, and somebody who's listening to this might say, well, you know, this is a disabled person's issue or whatever. Not necessarily, because of course Novalee's rights are completely been violated here, and she's not disabled, right?
No, she's not.
Yeah. So, I mean, but her rights have been violated as well here, not just, you know, through the insulting stuff that goes on, but I mean, her literal treatment seeming to be violating her right to due process also, you know, but here's the thing, all of that goes on, they go to jail, there's the whole problem with their property laying out on the lawn, okay, and if it wasn't for their neighbors looking out for them, who knows what would have happened to every single thing they had in the world, along with the evidence of what had been going on here, because they might have lost all that as well, right?
Yes.
So what happens here to their stuff and to them? I mean, she goes to the hospital, he goes to jail, and then I assume that after she's done at the hospital, she goes to jail as well. I could be wrong, but
but for just a little while. What happens is they had some friends that somehow caught on what was going on. They rented a big U-Haul truck and loaded up everything they could, and someone stepped forward that had just cleaned out a big storage area. They had like a big barn at their house, so they were able to unload this big U-Haul truck at some place that, you know, the bank and the cops and everybody did not know about, so it was secure there. And then later we were able to go through. Imagine going through everything that you have in your house, just thrown in big piles, and they were able to find I would say a bunch of plastic bags. They finally found their laptop and the video camera and written documents to give what I call the evidence, and they were able to regain that stuff because it had been secured because of it was just in the big pile of stuff. So they've got all the evidence so that if the Department of Justice wants to look into it, she's done a fantastic job of keeping every piece of paper. So the DOJ they've got a lot of ammunition if they want to pursue this.
Right. So how did they get out of jail, and then what happens? I mean, their house has been taken now. It's in the possession of the bank, despite the fact that they hadn't actually finished dealing with the court proceedings. What happens from there?
Well, what Howard had done is he bought some program from somebody on how to save your property. So he was going through a series of notifications to the bank to try to get things like the debt validation notice and things like this, the actual documents that he has every right to have. In fact, the state attorney general has stated that you have the right to this information. Well, in the process of all these notices of, please send me these documents or else I'm going to have to take another action. And then you take that next action and say, now please do what you're supposed to do or I will take another action. And all these actions are just sending pieces of paper to the bank. They ended up charging Howard with 10 counts of felonies, but because they call it mortgage fraud, and all he's doing is asking information from the bank.
Well, wait a minute. What you're saying is, What you're saying is that he requests the documents to show that there's a legitimate contract here, right? That there is, show me your party's documents, show me the lender's documents, show me where I signed on for XYZ. Please present me with the documentation. That's the step that he's involved in. And then afterwards, we can begin to examine what the contracts. It sounds very logical, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds very sensible. Go ahead.
There's another factor to this. Somebody did a real cursory, just right over the surface, look at the figures, what the house was worth, what the interest rate was, and how many years the loan was supposed to be. And they determined real quick that the Grabers were paying on if I get this right, a 30-year contract at the rate as though it were a 15-year contract. So that, or did I get it backwards? Anyway, they were paying as though it was the rate that they're paid would be correct for a 15-year contract.
Well,
they were supposed to pay it for 30 years.
That would indicate, Larry, that would indicate that they're getting paid. See, if you pay off a loan, any kind of loan, on a shorter time span, then you sort of pay more to each payment. But because you're paying it off quicker, right? I mean, just so I understand this, you're paying it off quicker, so you're paying a little more than you would if it were stretched out over the 30 years.
Correct. The numbers are something like it should have been $800 to $900 a month on a 30-year, but they're paying about $1,300. So that's another one of those things that the court system, trying to protect the bank or whatever was going on, we have no idea why they did what they did, but we're suspecting that this was like a cover-up to keep them from ever getting to court so that they could bring this to the court. Because when they went into foreclosure, they'd been paying for so long that they still had a credit if you consider that they were paying way too much per month.
Well, right, because based on the figure based on the figure that you gave, right, every 2 months or so, every 2 or 3, let's just be conservative, every 3 months that they paid, they basically paid for a fourth month at the rate that they should have been paying at. I mean, am I misunderstanding this, or is that about right?
You're dead on. That's exactly the situation as I understand it. So the fact that the bank was not authorized to do business, the fact that they had that stuff in there, the fact that the Grabers had found this statute, I'll blab it out this time. It's OCGA 44-11-32 is the actual statute that is telling the sheriff what to do. Mm-hmm. And that's another one of the things that they didn't want anyone to know. there's a whole series of statutes, and once you put them in the right sequence, you get a feel for what the lawmakers actually had in mind to protect the people. And then we look at the case law, what little there was, and you can see how it actually does work. So they didn't want, when I say they, the bank, probably the sheriff or whoever else that gets a little bit of a service fee or whatever for every foreclosure. There was another, let's say, conspiracy theory that Gwinnett County had so many foreclosures that the county was trying to get some federal funds to help out somehow with something. And Howard's saying it's a $10 million something from the feds because there were so many foreclosures. So they may have been intentionally running foreclosures so they could get the number up high enough to get some federal grant. That's kind of sketchy, but it's another one of those. When you do a lot of research, you find theories.
But when you get into an area here where you have so much going on, right? I mean, there is all sorts of possibilities for the motives as to why this is being directed by the local authorities, by the state authorities, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, but I mean, I'm just looking at how insane this all sounds, from his perspective, which is, look, first of all, he's requesting documentation just to get the particulars about the contract that he's supposed to be a party to, right? And then how does he wind up getting charged with felonies?
Yeah, those were felonies because he put his name in the line where it would have been a bank official putting their name. It was not forgery. He put his own name. He just put it in the wrong place. So they're charging him with forgery when in all reality he was, at most, you might say he was impersonating a bank official. Well, every Linda Green signature in the millions of robo-signed documents is the same charge. They're charging him with what they did millions of times. The difference is they got something for it. Howard was just, the house was already gone when they charged him with all that. Oh, and then to add more insult to injury, Howard had been quite active in the Republican Party, and when they needed to find where they could catch him at. So they knew that he was active in the Republican Party. So when he showed up and signed on and was actually literally serving in the capacity of a delegate for the county Republican Party, they drug him out of the building, threw the cuffs on him, and hauled him to jail. Now, because of his stroke, he was in there kind of as an honorary position.
Okay.
So that was never really pushed, but it sure looks to be not a real. It's just not a real nice thing to do to drag a delegate out of a county convention when he signed them as a delegate.
And it sounds to me
political ramifications.
Well, right, and it also sounds to me like they continuously keep trying to make an example out of him. Why? Why are they doing that? I mean, what is it? Okay, let's get down to this.
I think I could answer that question, and I hope nobody gets in trouble for this. My suspicion is they are so afraid that people are going to learn about this statute, 441132, that they would do anything to keep it from becoming common knowledge to the point of making examples of people.
Well, okay.
That is my theory.
And it seems to be a possibility because, after all, that would change the game regarding how this has all gone down. I mean, look, and still going back to his story one more time, look, he comes out, okay, so now they're both in jail. How did they get out?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know exactly how they got out and what happened immediately after they were, finally out of custody?
After, I think it was about 28 days in jail where they really messed up his medication, one of his friends put a property bond and bailed him out on a property bond. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the thing where they hauled him off from the Republican convention. It's Howard saying first and second time. They had him in and out of jail a couple of times. I can't keep it all straight, but that's basically how he got out. Was on a property bond.
And what terrible crimes was he being held on? I mean, give us some examples of what the what this very dangerous man, again I say sarcastically, was being continuously confined to a cell for. What was it exactly? I mean, they have him trespassing on banks' property. What else? I mean, what is it that they were actually because they got to tell you what you're charged with.
Yeah.
So what was he being charged with?
It was like 7 counts of mortgage fraud and 3 counts of, Howard saying the first time. I'm not sure what the first and second, but I'm going to have to summarize this because I don't know. I mean, I try to keep up with all of it, but it's so convoluted, so much going on. But bottom line, it was 10 counts, each one with a 17-year sentence, and so his supposedly attorney was saying that they were going to throw him in jail for 170 years, which I don't know of anybody after having a level 8 stroke could live another 170 years. It's just that sounds like mathematically impossible. But he's trying to, he's trying to explain it to me. I can't quite. But what they charged him with was mortgage fraud for doing what he had every right to do, and then the forgery for putting his name in the wrong spot. But he wrote his own autograph. It's just in the wrong spot. So I don't think the charges were accurate.
Right. So for filling out some paperwork a little bit incorrectly, he essentially gets charged with fraud.
They may take it to the extreme of saying paper terrorism. I mean, the bottom line is he had the audacity to look at the laws, to read the laws, and try to follow the law. That's the real. It's not a crime. It's just being so bold and being so audacious as to actually follow the law. That's what they're mad about. He dug up stuff they were trying to keep quiet.
Well, that's what the obvious point is, and this is why I keep asking you these same questions, because I want to keep leading it back to the inappropriate response to somebody trying to assert their rights, trying to follow through with their rules as they've laid them out. I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding things here, it seems to me as though this man and this woman both are just simply trying to continuously assert their rights. They're requesting information so that they can actually follow through with the court proceedings the way they're supposed to. I mean, maybe I'm just out of my mind here, but it sounds to me like that's what they're doing, and they are greeted with, threats, arrest, storming of their house, the taking of their home, the taking of their possessions, or really the mishandling of their possessions without any sort of, without any sort of care given to them, so that they can be, completely without a possession in the world or a place to go. If it wasn't for their friends, they wouldn't have gotten bailed out of jail. They wouldn't have had any of their possessions or any of their evidence that they had regarding this case protected. If it wasn't for the fact that, that, again, if it wasn't for their neighbors, they'd be without anything and probably still sitting in cells right now as we speak.
Could very well be, or without proper medical treatment and this 6-month continuance we've got. We have always thought that what they're trying to do was just push Howard to the point where he would not survive, and then that gets him out of the question. It's a done deal. Now, they at one time or actually a number of times, offered him a real simple little, he plead guilty to this charge, then we'll drop the whole thing. Well, we know what that's all about. As soon as he pleads guilty to something, then they're exonerated from any kind of recourse in the court under civil. Basically, suing the county for all the pain and suffering, everything they did. So they'd offered him a number of times, just plead guilty to this, and basically, yeah, what, $25 fine? So the difference is between a $25 fine for pleading guilty to some little itty-bitty misdemeanor or 170 years in jail for fighting it. That was a decision.
Yeah, well, what a deal they're offering, because this way you wind up surrendering all of your ability to come back at them because you were committing a crime and you admitted to it in an open court, right? I mean, that seems to be the strategy, unless I'm misunderstanding it again.
You nailed it. That's exactly what the strategy was.
You know, and what happened, and I'm sorry I keep going back to this story because it's just so unbelievable to me. So what happens after he gets out of jail, after she gets out of jail? Now they've got their possessions in their friend's barn. They've got nowhere to go. Okay, I'm assuming. What's that?
They lived in their car.
They lived in their car.
Yeah, here he is, a level 8 stroke survivor, and he's a large person, and she's not small, and they got a little small car, an economy car. It was real tight. So they lived in the car, bounced around. There was like 30 different places they bounced around to, and staying with friends, and it was just a rough lifestyle. And they made it somehow. They survived. Now, some of the other things.
Amazing that honestly this didn't kill him in the process, because it's not like he was in the strongest of conditions. So he winds up living in his car. Again, they're still asserting legally that he has no right to the home that he did pay for many years and probably overpaid for enough so that he should still have a credit. That's an interesting piece of the story. I didn't read that anywhere regarding their story, but please go ahead and add to that, because
if a person loses their house because of lack of payment, they should not lose their equity as well. But the way the system is set up, they lose all their equity. And with fractional reserve banking, the bank had really nothing invested anyway. The whole dollar figure that the bank claims to be lending is created with the autograph of the borrower. That's fractional reserve lending or fractional reserve banking, whichever term you want to use, where the actual money never really existed until the closing. Yeah, and that is pursuant to Title 12 United States Code. They are prevented from lending the depositors' money, and they are prevented from lending their own money. All they can lend is the fractional reserve, which is a whole other. That's another thing. Most people have no concept of fractional reserve lending, and I don't even understand monetization. I've tried to figure it out.
You know what? You and me both, because I've looked at this. Yeah. It seems as though this is what I understand, and this I identify this as fully my point of view, and I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, but here's what seems to happen, is that you're allowed to transfer the title to somebody based on a theoretical loan. The theoretical loan doesn't have to be backed by anything, it just has to be entered as existing. And once that happens, then the title seems to pass into this state where the bank holds it on your behalf. Now, it's on deposit for you, the person who's allegedly borrowing the money, and it seems to be the only actual equity involved in the transaction. The rest of the money is theoretically kind of created by a bookkeeping entry, okay, which means that the bank never actually had to pay the money to buy the house in the first place, that you're supposed to be buying with them as your purchasing agent. And, gee, Chuck, that sounds real confusing. It is. It is.
Now, I would add another couple levels to this.
Sure.
They've got the deed of trust, or what do they call it, the title, let's say, as collateral. They really don't have anything invested, but they got the property for collateral.
Right.
Then they talk a lot of people into getting a private mortgage insurance, a PMI. So people pay the interest on a PMI. They put the property itself as collateral. The bank really didn't have anything because the earnest money that's used when you buy it, the 10%, let's say 10% down, that's the 10% they need to have on deposit so they can create this money from fractional reserve lending. That is the fraction that is reserved, what you put down as earnest money. They create the rest out of thin air. They have the house as collateral, plus they have a PMI. There's no reason that they would ever want you to pay off a mortgage. If they foreclose, they get the property, they can sell it again. They get whatever payments you've made. They get the fractional reserve that you gave them, say 10%. And if you got a PMI, they get paid off again. So they may make 2.5 to 3 times as much money if they foreclose as as compared to if you actually paid it out.
Yeah, and
that's why foreclosure is such a big business.
It is guilty.
Yeah. So I know that your listeners, their heads are going to be spinning about now.
Well, it's extremely profitable because what happens is you get paid the initial deposit, which did exist. You have to actually present a feasible deposit, so that's your 10% down. That goes to the bank. Then of course the property itself, which they can resell, goes to them. Then on top of it, they have a mortgage. So when you have an insurance on the mortgage. So when the mortgage fails, they're paid based on that insurance claim as well. So by the time it's all said and done, and they resell that property, at a cut rate, they can actually begin the process again too. Over and over again. Somebody in the chat room stated a little bit ago, it sounds like paint the house, sell the house, repeat, because this is pretty much what happens here. And in the meantime, somebody who is, foolish enough to think that they were paying into something and creating equity is actually just being ripped off, essentially. And this is what happened to him. Best I can figure out, again, maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but, so, good God. I mean,
yeah, this is like, how deep does the rabbit hole go?
Right.
Welcome to,
welcome to the American dream. Like I said, in the posts about this show, it's an American dream stolen, and it's stolen by all of these financial mechanisms and institutions that have absolutely rigged the table so that, there's no way, if you're playing blackjack, baby, there's no way an ace comes up in that deck, so you can never actually win. You might be able to play for a while, but you're not getting an ace to pull a blackjack out. It's just not going to happen. It's absolutely unbelievable. Now, they wind up living in their car and everything else over this, and in the meantime, what has happened as far as them trying to, obviously they're probably still in debt, right? Still fighting the legal battle regarding these alleged charges of fraud and God knows what else. What else did they charge him with, or was it just all fraud?
Well, there were some misdemeanors that happened at the home invasion. Things like basically, if a cop tells you to leave and you don't, it's called criminal trespass remain. They were charged with that. Nobody was charged with disorderly conduct, but even the jury, once they saw the footage from the video camera she was holding, there was no way she was doing any disorderly conduct or trying to hurt the police officers at all, because she was holding a camera quite steady until they knocked her down. So they saw that was a trumped-up charge.
I'm surprised I didn't hear resisting arrest in that mix.
Was there a resisting arrest? Was that one of the charges? I guess not. He was mainly trespassing stuff. Yeah, it just goes on and on. It is clearly a case of the system trying to defend itself against knowledgeable citizens. Howard's trying to tell me something else. But anyway, that's kind of the nutshell, the whole thing in a nutshell as far as what happened there. Of course, there's many more little nuances to this thing. But bottom line, they were denied access to the court. They were denied due process. Their civil rights were violated. Then we started looking into the Americans with Disabilities, how there were rights being violated there. So Nova Lee and I took a course on how to become certified advocates for the Americans with Disabilities Act, which all that does is show that we studied the law and we can talk about the law. That's about all we can really do. But now that we have access to the Department of Justice, the person who can enforce the law, maybe things will change. We are hoping.
After all this, I'm wondering where we're at today now that, all of this has gone down. And like I said, I mean, they lost their home. They lost all this stuff. They were living in their car. They're not living in their car now, right?
No, they've got kind of temporary accommodations that prove to be pretty comfortable for them. So they're doing okay now. And he does get his disability check. They tried to cut that off. They went to the hospital. One of the times they drug into the hospital. The hospital says, "Well, you don't have Medicare," and they found that the sheriff department had notified Social Security that they were opening an investigation, and they think that they alluded to the idea that Howard may be conducting some kind of insurance fraud or something. So they cut him off Medicare. So the hospital, out of their little emergency fund, paid to patch him up one time when they drug him out of the court, which, in all reality, because the judge had made a determination where he'd lost his 11th Amendment immunity, that hospital actually has the right to go after that judge to get their money back. That's one of those little nuances of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Well, right, because
we don't know how.
If you cause an injury by violating somebody's civil rights, you can become liable for the damages resulting from that. That's as I understand that process. I could be wrong,
yes.
But
no, that is correct, and there is case law to back it up.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things down the road. We are hoping. I'm not a very religious man, but I do some praying once in a while, hoping that the thing goes down to where the court system is sanctioned by the Department of Justice, and it is proven that the Gravers have been, the rights have been violated. And at that point, there's some legal recourses that can be taken. And basically, I guess if they get slapped down by the Department of Justice and it's proven, and if the DOJ can prove the wrongdoing, then there might be some good come of this. My biggest fear is that the case law that would be created by the Graber case would send ripples through the entire mortgage. I mean, this is the perfect storm, the perfect case to create the case law that could bring this mortgage fraud to a halt. So it is almost like too big to fail, like the bank's too big to fail. The Graber case is almost too big for them to win.
Well, certainly they shouldn't be able to ignore it, because it is one of the most clear-cut cases that, as I understand it, of a complete violation of, just about at every single turn here. I mean, you have a contract, and let's try and summarize this real quick, and just, again, correct me where you think I'm wrong, but it seems as though you've got a contract which is made on a fraudulent basis, not by Mr. Graber, but by the lenders, by the banks. Okay, then you have law enforcement stepping in to be the instrument for the banks, okay, stepping in and actually enforcing color of law as opposed to the law, not actually abiding by an individual's right to due process, which is a constitutional violation, okay? Then ever after, you have the continued abuse of this man by the court systems, which is also, all sorts of open to censure regarding judicial practices and misconduct of the lawyers, of the judges, of seemingly the whole legal system in that area. And ever after, this is continuing onward where they're trying to offer him deals so that they can sort of, slip their way out, sort of wiggle their way or worm their way out of responsibility regarding the damage done to this one particular individual. And I point out again to the listener, this is not something that is just a case for somebody who has a disability or just a case for Georgia. This is actually happening all over the country, and you better consider this, that, as safe as you may feel, at any moment in time, you could very easily become Howard Graber. Okay, not only medical things happen to people. You could become physically incapacitated. You could have an interruption in income stream, as many of us have had in recent years. All of these things could come down on your head all at once, and without any sort of regard to your rights. You could have your home, everything in the world taken from you, be mistreated, and absolutely, discarded, which seems to be a violation of, one's human rights. Forgetting about, constitutional rights and all this, but it seems to be a direct violation of somebody's human right to exist. What else are you supposed to take from the man? They've jeopardized his health. They've probably done some irreparable damage to him by all this stress, taken his home and, his possessions in one way or another, despite the fact that some of his friends did preserve them for him to some degree, but there was no regard on the official standpoint about that. There was no regard for this man's health or his well-being or his future ever after. Him and his wife both, who, and I say again, were not armed, were not dangerous people. They were not criminals. They were not, running some drug dealing operation out of their home or doing something, subversive and dangerous to the government. This guy is involved in local politics. He's actually, doing research, checking into people's rights, looking at their codes, the IRS codes, like you were talking about at the very beginning. This kind of thing, interested in everybody else's rights and interested in following the letter of the law and trying to play by their rules, and this is the treatment he receives. This is exactly what I see. Now, Larry, tell me I'm wrong here somewhere.
You're dead right. That's exactly the situation. There's a statement, I don't exactly know the quotation, but basically an educated, a learned man cannot be enslaved, something along those lines. So here you have somebody that is a knowledgeable person. They're afraid. They are afraid of people like Howard because he knows the law. Our whole legal system operates on the ignorance of the populace. Once the populace knows the law, they cannot keep pulling the wool over our eyes. That, I think, is what makes Howard such a threat to this system. Not a threat to society, but to a corrupt system, because he can see the corruption.
Very clearly, and he seems to have experienced the result of the corruption. Now, Howard's been listening to this all right, and and understanding everything that's been said here from your end. Please make sure you get from him if there's anything that we have left out here. I want to make sure we include it because, this isn't about my opinions or what I'm seeing. I'm commenting on it, obviously, but and pushing the story forward a little bit, but I don't want to get in the way here. If there's something that we've left out that he wants to make sure...
I'm looking at a judge's order that was relatively recent, and this is just an idea of how arrogant this system is.
Would you mind reading that? Would you mind reading that for us? Okay.
What it is, this is one of those. It's setting up a medical hearing, and the judge having seen and heard of Howard's having these episodes, whatever I'll call it, where he would have a seizure because of the stress, the judge did not believe that they were a bona fide for real medical condition. So here is right from a judge's order. I'm going to quote it and read it. Number 3, Mr. Graver's next steps in delaying his trial has involved perfecting a swan dive maneuver at court appearances, which would be the envy of any boxer connected with rigged matches. Mr. Graver swoons to the floor where he convulses about the carpet. Mr. Graver has perfected his technique to such a degree that despite his occasions of hitting the floor at the name of the building they call GJAC is the name of the building. Anyway, he hits the floor in that building from differing heights during the court appearances, that he has allegedly never once struck his head or suffered a single bruise. This is a judge thinking that Mr. Graver is faking all of this. When they get him into the hospital and they realize he's had another seizure, they thought it was an anxiety attack, but then they looked at the way his body was convulsing and they realized it was actually a seizure. This judge has, in my opinion, the audacity of saying that Mr. Graver has perfected a swan dive and actually put that into a judge's order.
Well, that's lovely. I'd love to know the medical qualifications of that particular judge to be able to make that assessment, because after all, he must be. I mean, I'm just assuming that by the nature of his statement that he has to be, quite eminently qualified to assess the physical performance that he's witnessing regarding this, to actually say that he's faking it. Which is really the entire crux of what he's saying there, is that this has been a fake maneuver in order to delay the process. Okay, so is there some sort of medical qualifications that you guys are aware of for this particular judge?
No, we often have the joke about going into court and asking the judge, Your Honor, in your expert medical opinion, just phrase a question that way, and that would probably get me in contempt. And my joke is, do I really want to be the first certified advocate for the Americans with Disabilities Act that's thrown in jail for contempt for doing my job?
I wonder, because which one you would actually go to jail, or would you both have to go to jail is the question. Because, if you're acting on his behalf and you're his surrogate, do they put you both in a cell? Isn't that an interesting question?
Actually, because a certified advocate is acting on behalf of a disabled person, the advocate has the same rights as a disabled person. So if they were to violate my rights in a case like that, they'd be violating the rights of a disabled person, because we're acting in an official capacity for a disabled person. It gives me some protection under the the DOJ.
Well, you'd be literally considered an extension of the disabled person, much like a service animal is, whereas they don't allow animals into buildings or whatever, since the animal is considered an extension of the disabled person. To disallow the animal or to deny the animal access would be to deny the individual access, right? So I mean, sorry to compare it to a seeing eye dog, but I mean, essentially the same rule applies, though, right?
Yeah. I'm just a mouthpiece. What is actually kind of interesting is Novalee's position, because not only is she his wife, she's legal guardian, she is power of attorney, and the certified advocate. So she wears many hats, and that gives her lots of protections, and that kind of, the power of attorney and guardianship is another one of those little nuances of the law. When they came after Howard, the contract really wasn't binding, because he was considered in reduced capacity, and she was actually the person who had control of the property. So in a lot of respects, it came after the wrong person. But it gets really complicated. The person would have to really know this legal stuff, because her name was not on anything originally, but gained power of attorney as guardian. Actually, both of those.
Well, right.
So
since she has power of attorney over him, then that means that she has also control over his property and all of that as well. I mean, his bank accounts, his business dealings, all of that. She has just as much right to it as he would as an individual, as far as I understand it. You know, maybe I'm off here. But really, I do want you to ask Howard if there's anything else that we need to include here, because I want to make sure that we've covered all the ground that he wants covered. And, you know, if it's at all possible, if there's something else that we have left out, please, I want to make sure that it's included in this show.
Yeah. I think we've pretty much covered it. One thing I would like to do is spend just a moment giving some people a little bit of information about the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Okay.
Because this is something that, if you look at the history, it was only in effect for about 20 days. It took effect January 1st, 2009, and there was a change of administration January 20th. And because of that, it was never really made public knowledge. But one thing that anyone can do is walk into any entity that has 50 or more employees and ask to talk with the ADA Access Coordinator. And if there is not one, then get that kind of, if you can get it in writing, it's really nice, and then ask for a grievance procedure. Where is your grievance procedure for this Americans with Disabilities Act? If any entity, be it a court or a school or county or whatever, if they don't have at least those two, there's a third one, which is a self-evaluation and plan on how to become compliant. Any three of those, if they don't have them, the Department of Justice can step in and give them one of those letters that says, by midnight of such and such a date, you will be in compliance, or we'll be knocking on your door. They've knocked on the door in St. Louis, Denver, and Los Angeles. The only dollar figure I've heard was in Los Angeles, just to correct sidewalks and curb cuts. They're looking at numbers approaching $2 billion. And it's going to come right out of their budget to become compliant, because they flick their nose at the Department of Justice. That's the way I didn't get all the figures, but that's kind of the impression I got. And the spokespeople from St. Louis and Denver, I was not in on those classes. I missed those. But the impression I got is they're saying, if the Department of Justice comes knocking, pay attention. Do whatever, because if you don't comply, then they can come in and they can open all the books and they can look at everything and they can measure even how many pounds of force it takes to push a door. There was one case they talked about where a wall had to be moved because it was 13/32 of an inch too close to the center line of a toilet, water closet, commode, whatever you want to call it. So when they get persnickety, it can be expensive. So the Americans with Disabilities Act does have teeth, and we're just hoping that more people can become aware of the law.
Well, right, because this is sort of an under-publicized aspect. And it is, again, an extension of your civil rights, as an individual. I mean, I'm aware of some of this stuff, but to be honest with you, I mean, I'm even considered legally disabled as well, and I'm not even fully aware of all the provisions that come along with this. I mean, I'm vaguely aware of some of them, and I have seen what it is like when there are problems caused, for anything that has public access and you don't comply with the provisions. It's really interesting, and and this is one of the problems here in this case is in a major way that there was a complete violation of, again, the civil rights by extension of this law. The extension of one's civil rights by the use of this law. This is one of the main things that goes on here, but this is not something that is, exclusive to the disabled. There are many different things going on here. I mean, there are levels of fraud happening that could happen to anybody that, anybody in the sound of my voice that thinks that they own the property in which they inhabit. This is the problem, the way I see it. But of course, even more so when you're talking about somebody who is disabled. I mean, this is, again, my evaluation of it. And, dear God, man, I literally don't know what to say altogether about all this, except that this is a horrible situation, and it seems as though at every turn, the Grabers were met with just ill treatment by every single process that should have been available to them to have any sort of recourse in this case.
Correct. The difference between Gravers and most everyone else is they're researchers. They research the law. You use the term owning property. There's something most people never looked into, and that's allodial title. Most of the time, if you use the term allodial title, real estate people will say, oh, yeah, that's fee simple, and that's not the same. Fee simple would be like having a regular standalone house as opposed to living in a condo where you have a condo association. That would be the difference. But allodial is when you actually own the dirt. The only way you can really get allodial title to property is if you go back to the original land grant and get everybody who supposedly owns property in that original land grant to all work together to gain allodial title for that entire chunk of dirt. This is another one of those mind blowers that cause a person to have a paradigm shift. When you pay property tax, what you're doing is you're paying the rent on the dirt. When you're paying your mortgage or buying a house, what you're doing is you're paying for the improvements on the dirt. There was one case I heard of in Chicago where there was a foreclosure. Everyone was walking out, and the owner of the property said, now that you have foreclosed on my house, what are you going to do about the fact that the house is trespassing on my property because I have a allodial title to the dirt underneath that house? And the attorneys just about passed out because they'd never been posed with that question. So I'm going to take it one step further. If a person takes a big wad of money and goes to the dealership and buys an automobile and gets the certificate of origin, they actually own that automobile. But if you run it through and you get certificate of title, the state owns the vehicle, and you have to rent it from them. And because it's their property, they can tell you what you can and cannot do with that vehicle, that automobile. It's the same kind of thing with the allodial title. If you have a allodial title, you don't have to pay property tax because you own it free and clear. If you want to go down with your chainsaw and cut the trees right down to the water line, instead of being restricted like 50 feet back or whatever the offset is, but there was a guy in the federal penitentiary here in Atlanta. He was in the federal penitentiary because he cut trees down in a wet area. It was considered wetlands. He said, this is my property. I'll cut these trees if I want to. He ended up in the federal penitentiary over it because he was cutting trees on his own property. He did not have allodial title. So that's another one of them things people never thought about.
Right. One of the I got a text question in, which is which is what is the where does the case stand now with the Gravers?
The case is going to be a little cruel. I shouldn't say it. The case is not standing. It's probably sitting in a wheelchair because the person who is in control of the situation is a disabled person with the Department of Justice, the deputy director of the particular department that oversees civil rights for disabled people. And Sally Conway, one of the most amazing, one of the most wonderful people you'd ever met. I was almost in tears with the way she dealt with talking with Howard, because he got hung up on a word and he got to where he gets flustered and he starts to kind of become emotional, starts to almost cry because he can't find a word. And Sally put her hand on his knee and said, "I got all the time in the world. Just take your time." This person carries a lot of weight. And I was thinking, that is amazing. That somebody you think of as a bureaucrat that's carrying a lot of it. She was like the guest speaker at the whole symposium, roughly 1,000 people. And she's telling Howard, "I got all the time in the world. Just take your time. You'll find the words." She is probably going to bust it wide open. At least that's what we're hoping, and I think I'll start praying. That's because it keeps going on and on and on and on. Relentless. I think he's been in court about 30 times. If you count the misdemeanors and his wife and him both, it's probably pushing more 50 or 60 times actually having to being there. And then many times we get summons to be in court, and we get there and find that the attorney wasn't there, and they really didn't do anything. Well, he just put his health at risk again because the attorney, court-appointed attorney, in my opinion, he's nothing but a gatekeeper to keep them from being effective pro se litigants or pro se as being yourself or representing yourself. They have the capacity to do that, but they had the judge appoint an attorney who had been a prosecutor, and he is prosecuting the Gravers from the position of being a court-appointed attorney.
Well,
He's
right,
the one.
because let's understand something. On a national level, even when you appear pro se, this means you're representing yourself or working your own representation. And what happens is, generally speaking, they will assign a court-appointed, legal professional to sort of oversee that if you have a process that's going to take more than one day in court. And obviously, this is something that's not going to be adjudicated in a day. And what they're supposed to do is make sure that you're doing your filings correctly and you've got all your notices straight and things like that as you go forward. And they've been appointed one of these, and meanwhile, it seems as though the alleged legal advocate for them hasn't really been advocating for them. Is that about right?
Yeah, he is paid for by the court. He is an officer of the court, and he is an experienced prosecutor. And when the Gravers would file a notice of an ADA violation, the judge would say, "You don't have the what I call hybrid representation of representing yourself and having counsel. You have one or the other." So they'd throw out notices as though there were motions. And that's just another one of those little maneuvers that they do. So hopefully the DOJ will be looking at that and say, well, this doesn't hold up. This is not a motion. It is a notice of an ADA violation. And so they're just doing a sidestep thing and using the court-appointed attorney as a huge roadblock. He is a gatekeeper to keep the Gravers. And, Gravers have got some friends. We all kind of work as committee. We hash things out and come up with documents that need to be filed, but they always kick them back because, oh, you have an attorney. You have to put it through the attorney. And then we ask for transcripts. We've been begging for transcripts. All they do is they send them to the attorney, and he won't let us have them. And that's another ADA violation because he has to have access as part of the communication. They have, I mean, it's the point where we're about ready to subpoena the, I guess, file charges against the attorney or whatever under another ADA violation, which is under another title of the law, but to try to get the transcripts. We cannot get the transcripts. Without transcripts, there is no appellate court.
Okay, two other questions have come in. One I'm sure will be hard to answer, but a listener in the chat room said, I wonder what percentage of homeowners have a allodial title. I have no clue what that would be personally, but I'm guessing it's a very low percentage from what I understand.
Give it less than 0.1%, maybe. That's where I'd start.
Right.
Because most people don't even know it exists.
Right.
I found back when we still had access to the archives, I went and found a law dictionary from back in the 1800s, and that's how I really learned about it. They don't talk about certain things. So yeah, the allodial title is about as esoteric a thing as you're going to find. It's like talking about the bankruptcy of the early 30s, when about 7 countries went bankrupt. One of them was the United States, and the banks gained total control of this country. But that's about as esoteric a thing as you can't prove it one way or the other.
Mm. The other odd question here is more specific to the case. Again, another Skype text, which is that why? Okay, let me get the question straight here. Have they attempted to take it to higher courts? Because obviously the local courts are, compromised. Why not take it to a higher court and work your way up? I guess to a Supreme Court. Yeah, okay, to a Supreme Court. Well, I guess it could be the state Supreme Court and so on and so forth. Has there been an attempt to bring it to higher authorities to see if it could be adjudicated by a higher court?
Yes, I can't remember what district it is here. Federal court. Pardon? Fourth district. Northern district. Anyway, whichever district it is, they've taken it to the federal court, and those judges seem to be, let's say, supportive of the people in Gwinnett. The theory is the judges that work on the federal level in this area, they all live in Gwinnett County. That's the theory we're working with. They basically said that their suit or whatever was frivolous because Novalee was not injured. That's it, because she was not disabled. Because there was only one of the parties disabled, they kicked it out as being frivolous, and that was on the federal court level. It is, and then of course there was the ones in the middle that one time we went into, I believe, a Superior Court, and the cameras were there. We had the news media, and that judge was doing everything he could to say, I have no jurisdiction in this. He wanted no part of it because the cameras were on him. So one time we did have the media in there, and then we kind of explained it to the media outside. Didn't go anywhere, but at least the eyes, it's like the light was turned on and the cockroach had to scurry. That's the best analogy I can think of. Yeah, we're working it up. There's movement to take it right on all the way up to the U.S. Supreme, but we're hoping that the DOJ will step in and bust it wide open, and then it'll be a lot easier. In fact, there's talk of, my being the one that actually files charges against some judges. That one I read to you about the swan dive.
Right. As
far as I'm concerned, I'd go after that judge for libel and defamation of character. That's the approach I would take, because a judge can't say that in an order. That's just unprofessional.
Well, extremely, and I mean it's definitely one of those things where you could definitely seek some sort of God, what do they call that? See, it's a little different, but what they do is, I mean, it's a misconduct thing where, I mean, he could actually be punished by the bar association there in the state for doing stuff like that, because it's way out of his league there about it. I mean, if he was making a judgment call, relating to evidence or something like that, that's one thing. If he was making a statement about law, that's another thing. But I mean, in essence, I know it sounded like I was kind of being very sarcastic there. I mean, but essentially, he's ventured to make a medical a medical opinion here regarding what he witnessed in the courtroom. Why is that commentary necessary? And I could see that being one of those things where, hey, you may wind up seeing a judge removed. That's a possibility.
Yeah.
Or
we only had one judge did recuse, and probably about the only area that I am in disagreement with the Gravers is the judge that recused himself actually did act somewhat responsible through the thing, but in the bottom line, he was still complicit. So, but that was just one judge. He did recuse, and then this judge, the one that did the swan dive order, he probably needs to be thrown off the bench and maybe even disbarred.
Right.
Just my level feeling.
Right. Well, and I agree with you. Listen, we only have about 8 minutes left, and I do. Can you believe it? 2 hours just went by, but we have about 8 minutes left, and I wonder if you wanted to direct people to where they can find out more about this, and also, if there's any websites or anything that that the Gravers would like people to look at, things like that, and go ahead and tell people about that.
Okay, what I want to do is rattle off some official Code of Georgia annotated, some numbers we call OCGAs.
Okay.
Just going to give some numbers for people to write down if they want to look at what the laws are here. Title 44, Chapter 14, Section 186 states that you have the right to trial. 441133 says that they have to have a specific document called a FIFE in order to do a foreclosure. 441130 is the instructions on how to get access to the court. You just have to read the thing. And then 44-11-32 is the instructions to the sheriff. Those, like I said, are specific to Georgia, but you probably find similar laws throughout the states.
In Northern District, they didn't have a FIFE.
Howard just says that it was proven in one of the higher courts that there was no FIFE in their foreclosure, so I wasn't even fully aware of that. So it was an unlawful foreclosure, and it was done unlawfully. Yeah. Howard says illegal. I draw a distinction between what's legal and what is lawful. Lots of things out there are legal, but they are against the laws of nature, let's say God's law. So unlawful is a higher standard than what is legal. They can make things legal. It's like, let's say abortion. If they make it legal, it's still not moral. If you are one who thinks that, I'm not going to get into that. Well, that's a real can of worms. But just as an example, I wish I had more questions. Those are easier to work with. Are we done? I think I lost him. I've lost him.
No, we're not done. I was just muted up.
I didn't lose you.
No, I was muted up there. I was letting you speak, and I just wanted to, let you say what it was you wanted. I wouldn't want to go into the abortion debate either.
No. That was A bad example on my part. I'll admit that.
It's okay, no problem. But here's the real deal as far as I'm concerned. The way I boil this entire thing down is that, again, this guy was absolutely mistreated. Both of them were absolutely mistreated by the system at every single turn. Here we have it, on a sort of local level, in the courts. Regarding an individual's civil rights, all of these things are definitely part of the equation here. And again, I want to thank you for joining us tonight and going through this. This is just one of those. I shake my head. This is not. I'm sorry. This is not the country that I thought I grew up in. Where these kind of things happen. Invasion being a description for what you're saying there, it looks to me more like they were stormed by a superiorly armed force, which happened to be their local sheriff's department, but that's sort of irrelevant when you take a look at what happened here. And by use of all of these sort of, seemingly lawful actions that are truly reprehensible and absolutely disgusting. In my estimation, I don't know how else to put that, to be honest with you, Larry, but I do appreciate the time that you put in, and if there's any sort of last word that you or Howard want to get in, I thank you for bringing this story to our attention. I do hope that the DOJ steps in regarding the violation of civil rights here. If not, I hope that the Gravers do receive some sort of relief in a higher court. In some way, shape, or form, this needs to be stopped. This needs to be reversed, and this gentleman is actually in need of a serious apology, as well as reparations to be paid to him for the damage done, in my estimation. Again, that's my commentary, but that's what I hear. Okay.
My final word is I would like for as many listeners as possible to go online and look up one federal law or statute. It's 12 United States Code, which is 12 USC. The number is 2605. So it's 12 United States Code, section 2605. And that's the actual law. See, Title 12 is all banking. It's the law that says you have the right to ask the bank for that information. So that's a federal law. So it supersedes the state law. So that's probably the final word is, if you're really interested in this, that's the bottom line. You have the right to all that information. And you have the right to rescind your signature on that borrower's waiver of rights to reestablish your right to a jury trial.
Absolutely. Listen, we're just about out of time, Larry, and I do say that people should look up exactly what you said. I want to thank everybody who decided to tune in for the Ochelli Effect tonight here on UCY.tv. And, of course, you can find the archives if you're catching this further on down the line or any other way. It's at ucy.tv/TOE. There is the archive there. The YouTube video of this show will be up probably in a couple of hours. The archive MP3 will be up in about 2 minutes. And that's about all I got to say there, and I will make sure to pass that along to you guys so that you can take a listen to it yourselves and hear that. And I do appreciate your time. Thank you, Howard. Tell Howard that I said thank you if he can't hear me.
I hear you.
Thank you,
Howard on the phone now.
Howard, I appreciate you coming
so
to me with your story and allowing us to go through it. And if there's anything we missed, absolutely, sir, if you want to have Larry come back on, or if you want to come on, or your wife, it doesn't matter. I would love to make sure that we get more awareness about this story because it affects all of us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody have a good night, and stay tuned for Jaded, which will come up next, and I'm sure my bumper is just about to kick in. Thanks to everybody who decided to listen. I do appreciate all of you, and I hope that you consider that, at any moment, in fact, you could very easily be in the very same position that the Gravers are in, and this is all been done by design. This is the operating system in which we find ourselves, and there are ways to deal with it, and I hope that they don't win when it comes to the Gravers or anybody out there. The rig game needs to be ended, folks.